Okay, so uh, a lot has been made of this very interesting Keir Starmer speech, in which he seems to suggest, as many of us have suggested, myself included, that all of this mass immigration, he's talking about England in particular, but in Western countries generally, we've experienced this in the United States. I have been arguing for a long time. There's no way they can't stop this. If you have this kind of overwhelming mass immigration, it can only be by design. So Starmer kind of came out and said it, although as we see, I think we will see, I think more for political reasons.
What the British people are owed is an explanation. Because a failure, what the British people are owed is an explanation. Because a failure on this scale isn't just bad luck, it isn't a global trend or taking your eye off the ball. No, this is a different order of failure. This happened by design, not accident. Policies were reformed deliberately to liberalise immigration. Brexit was used for that purpose, to turn Britain into a one-nation experiment in open borders. Global Britain. Remember that slogan? That is what they meant. A policy with no support, and which they then pretended wasn't happening.
Okay, so Keir Starmer, from everything we know about him, is one of the most amoral, unprincipled politicians to come down the pike. So while I would like to tell you that this is a smoking gun, he proved it, you can't really say that given that this contradicts his own record on this issue. So every time hypocritical Starmer called for softer rules on immigration. Britain's record migration figures should shock all of us, Sir Keir Starmer claimed on Thursday, as the latest data revealed net migration hit a high of nearly 1 million last year. Now, Britain is not a large country. That is a huge amount of immigration for a country that size, 1 million in a year. And that has definitely, to some extent, destabilized the country. At a hastily organized Downing Street press conference, the Prime Minister said Brexit had turned Britain into an open borders experiment. He accused the Conservatives of allowing migration levels to get completely out of control, with figures quadrupling since 2019, the year before Brexit legislation was enacted, and net migration reaching 906,000 in 2023. This was driven by people from outside the EU coming to the UK on work or study visas. He has also repeatedly criticized the Conservatives' record on small boat crossings. But the PM has, on many previous occasions, adopted a softer stance on migration, including voting against stricter asylum measures 14 times while in opposition between 2015 and 2022, according to an analysis by the Henry Jackson Society. He never voted in favor of stricter measures. In particular, before becoming Labour leader, Starmer was vocal about maintaining free movement between the UK and the EU as the former separated itself from the bloc. He has since ruled out any return to freedom of movement. Tory critics have meanwhile accused Starmer, who in 1988 wrote in an edition of the magazine Socialist Lawyer that, quote, there is a racist undercurrent which permeates all immigration law, of hypocrisy on migration. Neil O'Brien, the Conservative MP, said on Thursday, quote, Starmer previously said all immigration law was racist. He's full of BS. Now, yes, it sounds like Starmer is just trying to turn this very unpopular issue back on the Conservatives, even though he himself, throughout his career, had a completely different position on this. In fact, There is video of him saying something very different on immigration.
We need to make the wider case on immigration. We welcome migrants. We don't scapegoat them. Low wages, poor housing, poor public services are not the fault of migrants and people.
Okay, now, interestingly, not everyone is coming to England. England and many other EU countries are so strained in their public resources, partly as a result of unskilled migrants coming into these countries, that some of the skilled migrants from Eastern European countries are deciding to return home. When I first went to England, I worked in a restaurant on student exchange visa for the summer. It was 1990. Those were the immigrants. The Soviet Union had just collapsed, and you had all of these Polish, Eastern European immigrants. They are beginning to return home en masse. About a third, it's believed. There were 2.5 million Poles living abroad. They estimate it's down to about 1.5. So many would say that it is because of their immigration scheme. They will not allow mass immigration into Poland. They will not allow it in many Eastern European countries. Now, speaking of Eastern European countries with very strict immigration policies, Viktor Orban actually did a few years back, I think this is back in 2015, or no, 2019. He talked about an actual plan that was released by George Soros to engineer mass immigration. So I believe Starmer here is politically motivated. I mean, clearly, he's had completely the opposite position for his entire career. But that doesn't mean there is no evidence that this has been a massive social engineering project. So we'll listen to a little bit of what he says.
Remember how Mr. George Soros published his plan in English in a Project Syndicate publication. It was done 2015, September 26. And he published a plan. He said that he is my, I'm quoting, here are the 6 components of my comprehensive plan. I just quote 2 or 3 points of that. First is, he said very clearly, 2015, that, quoting again, EU has to accept at least 1 million asylum seekers annually. That was the first point. Second, he said, adequate financing is critical. And he proposed to issue long-term euro bonds for financing the migration crisis and the migrants' social and welfare taking care when they arrive to the European Union. And another point which is very important for Hungary, which is involving the territory of Hungary directly into this program, he said that, quoting them, safe channels must be established for asylum seekers, starting with getting them from Greece and Italy to their destination countries, which means to bring them to Greece, to Hungary, and then have them to go to Austria. So don't forget that what we are speaking about is not an accidental stories, not a bulk of 10 years of accidental stories. It's a plan which is going on. It was written, it was published, it's known. So we are fighting again an organized gang called Empire of George Soros, NGOs, who are just supporting everybody who is transgressing our legal system and our regulation, and financing illegal activity against our nation. So this is why the story is not just about migration, but it's about how this European Union is working and how George Soros was able to captive the main positions inside many institutions of European Union, buying out MPs and other leaders, and in order to execute the plan which is written, and it's against all the Christian and nation-based political forces. It's against us. It's about how to change Europe and how to eliminate and push aside all the Christian, conservative, national-based political leaders and voters from the European Union decision-making bodies. So this is the migration about, not just about migration. Sorry for.
Okay. All right. So, as is pretty typical of people coming from Orban's point of view, he leaves a lot of things out, although I think he's right on the face of it, which I'll get into. But hey, Hungary, in spite of having this kind of a strict immigration policy similar to Poland's, actually is not doing that great economically. They do have higher growth than you have in more developed economies. They're kind of a mid range economy. But all that to say, just because Poland is having this boom economy, that doesn't mean every country that has these strict immigration policies ends up having a thriving, booming economy. Now, in terms of what he's saying and in terms of what I make of this kind of immigration, what he leaves out is, these people wouldn't be so desperate to come there if the West would stop bombing their countries and stealing their resources. That's the whole half of the equation that he's not talking about. And putting it all in cultural terms and not in economic terms, like the desire to suppress wages and destabilize labor markets, people like Orban tend to stay away from that. If you pull out and you look at the big picture, and this is why you should not blame the immigrants for this, you should certainly direct wrath at the leadership that's created these circumstances. Yeah, does it appear that you have a global agenda on the part of certain global entities and leaders to dress up what is essentially an imperial project in the language of humanitarianism? Yeah, they bomb these people and then they say you're a racist if you don't want them to come into your country and strain the resources. They're getting it both ways. On the one side, they're creating the need for these people to migrate, and on the other side, they're benefiting from what the migration is doing to the labor market and the strength of union power, the strength of working people in these countries. I think they're working it on both ends. Now, you can debate that, but the idea that a country like the United States, that countries like the UK, can't stop 1 million people from entering, they can't do anything about that. I have always said there is absolutely no way this is not by design. All you can talk about at that point is why. What is the purpose of it?
Yeah, exactly. And what are the mechanics of the design? I mean, as you said, Keir Starmer, just a completely amoral actor. Keir Starmer is like if Klaus Schwab and Alice Walton conceived a baby via IVF. That's what he would be. And so you really can't. You really can't look to him as any source of perspective or even honesty about this. As you could see there, he talked about that as if he really was not implicated in that. And look, in Europe, it's a Middle Eastern migrant issue because those are the countries that get bombed over there. And then
North Africa.
And right, exactly. And on our side of the world, it is South and Central America who we sanction and whose governments we overthrow, right? And it's certainly orchestrated on a macro level, right? I mean, destabilizing labor markets here, driving down wages here is really, I would argue, not the goal. It's just one of the benefits that come with a social engineering project at this scale by people who have as big a view of this as these actors who we're talking about do. It's really, suppressing wages is a nice added benefit, but this is really just about maintaining a certain global order, maintaining dominance over certain regions of the world. And what's a nice trap about the immigration thing when it's made, as far as the liberals are concerned, is that, they get to scream racist at people for opposing the consequences of their racism. It's racist to dictate terms to South American and Central American countries. It's certainly racist, certainly our entire Middle Eastern policy, up to and including, obviously, the genocide in Gaza right now, but the whole thing is racism of a kind. And now Orban puts it a different way. Obviously, you have your conservative figures accent one side of this and the liberal leaders accent a different side of this. But at the end of the day, yeah, it's all the same plan. And it all comes
Right.
from the same basic
Exactly.
place. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, and that is why there's a tremendous worldwide backlash, and people are turning towards leaders like Maloney, leaders like Trump, who are promising to protect them from these social engineering schemes on every level. Not just in immigration and the overall liberal kind of Davos WEF project.
Right.
Everything. They're rejecting. They have discredited even areas where they may have a point, like climate change. Nobody wants to hear it. Nobody trusts any of it because it's clearly coming from people who see it as their role to engineer society and to dictate what the course of society is going to be from on high.
Yeah, and who has resources and who does not. And by who, we don't mean
Right.
which countries
Right.
have them. They don't really see the world that way. They don't really like the idea of countries. Countries are lines on a map
Right.
that dictate
Right.
where and how they
Right.
can do business. They don't like that. Countries
Right.
get in the way, right? There are certain people, certain corporations, certain groups. I mean, there's the network monologue. There are the United States of America, blah blah blah. But then in Wall Street, I think Gordon Gekko has a similar type of monologue where he says there is no America or something like
Right.
that.
Right.
And that those, as you can see there, those two monologues come from two different places, but they both essentially mean the same thing. That at a certain echelon of the global hierarchy, countries, borders, cultures, places, they're just an inconvenience. Basically, it's about who's with the program, who's not with the program. That's why the West has had a hard-on for Russia going back thousands of years. Russia remained Orthodox while most of Europe went Catholic. And so Russia was the odd man out for a very long time. And, you could see now, this is what the Brexit vote was really about. It's weird that Starmer mentioned the Brexit vote because the Brexit vote, the reason Brexit passed was in response to these liberal immigration policies. So
Right.
he's just a snaky politician. I don't even know what he meant by that. He's just a
scum.
slimeball. Yeah.
Well, that's where if you want to have a serious discussion about this, of course, everyone just seized on this.
Right.
Oh, look, he admitted it. That's not a good place to go for an authoritative smoking gun, right? Because anyone could just. And I agree with the perspective. I
Right.
do agree that yes, this has been engineered, but with Starmer, you discredit your own argument by using him as a source because this is so clearly a political ploy.
Yes. Yep. Pretty obviously.
Please clap.